Good morning and welcome to the Planning and Placemaking Committee of the 13th of March 2024. I'm Councillor Ian Massey and I'm the convener of this committee. Joining me on the top table today are, from my far left, is Councillor Grant Stewart, Vice Convener, Miss Jessica Gill, Democratic Services Officer, and Mr Colin Elliott, Solicitor. And on my right is Mr Christian Smith, Development Management and Building Standards Service Manager, Mr Sean Panton, Team Leader, Major Developments, and online is Mr Paul Williamson, Team Leader, Local Developments. A bit of housekeeping, as this is a hybrid meeting, members joining virtually are reminded that if you leave the meeting during consideration of any application, you are unable to participate or vote on that item when you return to the meeting. This also means that if a member loses internet connection during consideration of an item, they should not vote on that item. Please advise the clerk via the meeting chat that you are leaving the meeting, or if you have lost your connection and are therefore unable to vote on that item. And whilst we are operating as a hybrid meeting for the proceedings today, can I remind councillors and officers to use the chat box to attract my attention, which all members should have access to. Q for question, C for comment. I will now ask the clerk to confirm any apologies and attendance of those in the chamber and online. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. We have no apologies today with no substitutes. We have a few members online. I'll ask to confirm they're present, please. Councillor Harvey.
Present.
Councillor James.
Morning, Jess. Present.
And Councillor Leishman.
Good morning, Jess. I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Reid, I believe, is just running a couple of minutes late, and all other members are present in the chambers.
Thank you. Can I inform the committee that agenda item 531 in relation to 23-01255/FLL, siting of a mobile crusher and screening plant for a temporary period at Newtile Farm, Dunkeld, has been withdrawn from today's agenda and will be considered at the next meeting of the committee. Declarations of interest. Do any members have a declaration of interest? No, thank you. Item 3, the minutes of the Planning and Placemaking Committee of the 7th of February 2024. Can the committee agree the content of the minute? Thank you. And we do have deputations today. Can I ask the committee if they agree to hear deputations on items 511, 512, 521, 532 and 533? Okay, thank you. Is Councillor Reid present yet? Okay. Right. Okay. You just have to sit out of this application now. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So we move on to major applications, and this is for the change of use of agricultural land to form extension to existing leisure park, formation of internal access, parking, hard standing, engineering works and landscaping at land 200 metres northeast of Egmore Caravan Site, St Mary's Road, Burnham. And to introduce the report is Mr Panton. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, councillors. The first item on the agenda today is a major planning application for the extension of Erigmore Caravan Site, Burnham. Erigmore currently has 157 caravans, which are a mix of privately owned and holiday lets, and the planning application seeks to expand the site to accommodate a further 76 lodges. The application is unfortunately recommended for refusal today for reasons contained within the report before you. 99 objections were also received in relation to the application. I will now take members through a short presentation to detail the proposals further. Next slide, please. This first plan shows the location of the site in relation to Burnham. You can see the Perth Road and the A9 to the south, Burnham itself to the west, the River Tay to the north, and an agricultural field to the east. The site is approximately 4.6 hectares and is located out with the settlement boundary of Burnham. Next slide, please. Here we have an extract of our Local Development Plan 2 showing the settlements of Dunkeld and Burnham. The location of the site is shown by the red star to the bottom right. As seen, the site is out with the settlement boundary on an area identified as a historic garden and designed landscape. The site is also part of a national scenic area. Next slide, please. Here we have another location plan. This plan better shows the relationship of the site with the existing caravan park to the west. You can also see where the existing road connection leads to the junction with the Perth Road. Next slide, please. Now we have a proposed site plan showing the general arrangement of the lodges. You can also see the proposed landscaping and footpath connections. The yellow line passing through the site in a diagonal fashion is a high pressure pipeline that already passes through the site. Next slide, please. Here we have some of the proposed lodge types. The lodges proposed all fall under the definition of a caravan and are movable, although will be placed on designated newly formed concrete bases. I will now take members through a series of recent photographs from my site visit last month. First image, please. This first photograph shows the access of the site from the Perth Road. As seen, it is a relatively wide access with appropriate signage already in place. Next image, please. The second photograph shows the access road leading from the Perth Road to the site, which is the field shown by the red arrow. This existing access road will also be utilised to serve the proposed development. Next image, please. This next photograph shows the site itself. As seen, it is relatively flat in nature and currently in agricultural use. The River Tay is located beyond the trees you can see at the back of the field. Next image, please. This photograph shows some of the existing lodges, with the application site being the field to the right of the image. The access to the extended site will be taken from just before the blue sign you can see. Next image, please. This image is now taken from further up the hill at Erigmore, looking down on the application site. Here you can see the context of the site better. Next photograph, please. This final image shows the existing facilities on offer at Erigmore. This area will not be altered by the proposed development. Next slide, please. Thank you, Convener. That now concludes my presentation. I will leave members with the proposed site plan for reference.
Thank you, Mr. Panton. We do have deputation on this item, so I'll now hand over to the Vice Convener for the deputations procedures. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Can I call on Mr. Shannon, who is an agent and works for Tetra? Good morning. Mr. Shannon, you're probably aware that you've got 10 minutes for your deputation. I'll give you a prompt after 9 minutes. So whenever you're ready, I'll start the clock.
Okay, well, thanks very much for the opportunity to address members of the development panel. My name's Peter Shannon. I'm a planning director in Tetra Tech. I'm here today speaking on behalf of Verdant Leisure, who are the applicant for the proposed development. Verdant Leisure is an award-winning holiday park operator with sites across the UK and 3 in Perthshire. The applicant acquired Erigmore Leisure Park in 2020 and wants to continue to invest in the park and the facilities. The proposed development, as you've seen, is located adjacent to the existing Erigmore Leisure Park. The proposals are for an additional 76 holiday units together with landscaping, pathways and infrastructure. It will use the existing park's facilities and access to help facilitate the growth of an existing business in a sustainable location. The existing park is focused around Erigmore House, a Category B listed building which contains the park's entertainment, catering, leisure and administrative functions. The leisure park currently contains 157 developed pitches, the vast majority of which are currently privately owned and short-term lets. The existing park has planning consent and a license to accommodate a maximum of 278 units, including 200 static caravans. The existing fleet on the site itself are mostly occupied, and the demand for new units is increasing. Erigmore Leisure Park is a popular destination, and demand for new lodges has led to a review of the development potential to meet the demand and support the existing operations through economies of scale. Okay. Although the applicant has some headroom in the existing extant consent, intensification of the site is unlikely to be possible due to the environmental constraints. The only logical option is to increase the provision of units through extension of the existing park. Pre-application advice was sought from the council, which concluded with the scheme being given support in principle subject to satisfying technical issues. The applicant has redefined the design principles of the development through 2 stages of public consultation, building on technical evidence and feedback from community and statutory bodies. The key design principles are delivering a high-quality leisure park development which integrates and complements the existing site, maintaining connectivity to the River Tay, minimising flood risk and the drainage impacts, ensuring that existing utilities are maintained and not impacted by the development, respecting the local designations, and development of biodiversity enhancements where minimising the impacts on existing assets. During the application process, the applicant has continued to work closely with the council and other parties, including notably SEPA, in addressing their comments and concerns. The design layout of the scheme has sought to delicately balance the physical, technical and policy constraints. Landscape and visual impact has been a key consideration through the design and the design process, and the application itself is supported by a comprehensive landscape visual appraisal and landscaping scheme. Flood risk has also been carefully considered, and we've worked collaboratively with the council to understand the site's flood risk and to develop appropriate design and drainage solutions. It is important to note there are no objections from statutory consultees related to flood risk, nature, heritage, landscape or highways. The development of the site itself would result in the equivalent of an additional 8 full-time members of staff employed at the site, and also lead to an increase in visitor numbers to the area. The increase in holidaymakers to the site would make a significantly positive contribution to the local economy and should be given weight in the determination of the application. The officer's report has not properly considered the overall planning balance and has given minimal consideration to the economic benefits of the scheme. We consider that the report places significant weight on policies less relevant to the application itself, while less weight on those that support expansion of the existing business and the holiday park itself. In places, the report seems to consider the site as a fresh new development rather than an extension to an existing and successful holiday park. Fundamentally, we consider the reasons for refusal are not evidence-based. With regards to the reasons for refusal, the applicant, with regards to the first reason for refusal, the applicant has supported the application with a landscape and visual appraisal and a detailed landscaping plan. The scope, including viewpoints, locations, were discussed and agreed with the council during the preparation of the application. The landscape visual appraisal concluded that for most landscape and visual receptors, the degree of effects would be slight or imperceptible. Mitigation planting is proposed to ensure that the scheme would fit with existing built character. Woodland planting within the boundaries of the site would reduce the impacts and degree of the views experienced by people near the site and reflect the balance of woodland and built form along the River Tay Valley. Glimpses of the development from the River Tay path, with turning to the glimpses of the development from the River Tay path, the landscape visual appraisal found that these views would be through existing gaps in existing trees and vegetation along the footpath. Once the proposed mitigation matures, views from the path would be further interrupted, thus neutralising the effect in those locations. We would highlight that the landscape and visual impacts were assessed by both Historic Scotland, Historic Environment Scotland and Nature Scotland, who did not object to the proposals, with Nature Scotland specifically stating the development would have no direct or indirect effect on any of the special qualities of the NSA. The proposed extension would reflect the existing leisure park, and over time the proposed woodland planting would help the development assimilate into the environment. Furthermore, to conclude on the first reason for refusal, the Council have not provided supporting evidence for the decision and have not provided landscape appraisal, and therefore the evidence based isn't there to make the decision in the way it's been made. Moving to reason 2 and 3, the settlement statement for the area notes that the importance of tourism in maintaining employment and viability of services is noted both in the statement and in the officer's report that the village is highly constrained and there's limited opportunities for expansion. The application site is not allocated for development, but we would highlight it's located adjacent to the existing park, which is identified for tourism uses in the adopted plan. The scheme would be managed by Verdant Leisure. Use of the facilities and access point would be the same as the existing park, and therefore we can reasonably conclude that the proposed extension is an appropriate use for the site. The proposed development is highly sustainable, being located adjacent to the existing leisure park at the edge of a settlement in proximity to road, rail, bus and cycle links. The composition of the scheme will be a mixture of short-term lets, privately owned lodges. Providing these forms of accommodation will supply additional accommodation in a sustainable location that will provide an alternative to second homes and local short-term holiday lets. In conclusion, the overall principle of the development is acceptable, given that it is an expansion of a long-established business where options for expansion and growth are limited. No other sites are available for expansion in the local vicinity. All technical issues have been subjected to detailed scrutiny and addressed to the satisfaction of statutory bodies. Tourism is recognised as a key sector at national, regional and local level, and the village is noted as a tourist destination, and the proposed development will help increase the number of tourists visiting the area. As there's policy support and no technical reasons to warrant refusal, we respectfully request that you support the application. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Shannon. Are you willing to take questions from members? Well, thank you. Members, could you populate the chat function if you have any questions? Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Mr. Shannon, for your presentation. I note you said about there was a pre-application put in, and there was a comment here saying that there were caveats attached to that. And one of the big changes, of course, is this new national policy framework 4, which has come in, which we now have to follow. I'm looking at paragraph 57. It does clearly say in here, according to NPF 4 policy 9, part B, it is stated that proposals on greenfield sites, and I'm assuming this must be a greenfield site, will not be supported unless the site has been allocated for development or the proposal is explicitly supported by policies in the LDP. So our LDP clearly states that it's not for development. So it contravenes policy 9 of us and NPF 4 policy 9 as well. A comment on that, please.
Yes. So in reviewing the sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, that's better. In reviewing the planning situation, we've got to consider the full portfolio of policies, both at national level and local level. For an extension to a local business and an extension to holiday park, those two aspects are supported by local policy as an exception to the general spatial strategy of the area, because there's a locational requirement to have the development in the area is it's an extension to the existing park. So we cannot develop brownfield site unless it's adjacent to the site. So in one respect, the national policy obviously pushes development onto brownfield sites because of the sustainability, but in this case, policies also support local business expansion and specifically caravan parks expansion and holiday parks.
Bailey Williamson. Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and thank you, Mr. Shannon, for your presentation. Thinking about drainage and flooding, it's been noted that many of the representation comments have been on the lack of capacity at the local wastewater treatment plant. I note you haven't made a proposal for private fill drainage. Can you comment on that, please?
Yes. So during the pre-application process, we've engaged with Scottish Water on the capacity of the local wastewater treatment works. We understand there's potential capacity issues there. However, to continue those discussions and to continue to develop a solution for that, we need a consent in place. So once we've got a consent in place, there will be a mechanism to explore the capacity in detail and then to move forward with any solution that actually is required. So currently we're proposing to utilise that local water treatment works. However, the pre-application discussions have taken place, but we haven't concluded those discussions at this point.
Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just like to ask a bit further. You made note that the extension would potentially provide 8 extra full-time positions. Does the caravan park currently offer live-in accommodation, or do you expect these employees to be from the local area? Because I'm asking this question because there's a strong concern within the local community about housing availability. Thank you.
I believe that currently in the existing park, there's a mixture of people living on site and who are live in the local area, in the local village. I think that's right. Yes, that is right. So we'd anticipate, again, we can't fully anticipate that where these people may come from, but the local workforce is already forming part of the workforce that's working at Ericmore House. Therefore, I would assume that there would be the opportunity for local employment. And yes, we understand that the housing is a key issue in the local area, but we'd anticipate that the future employment opportunities would arise for local people in the local area.
Councillor Brown.
Sorry, thanks, Vice Convener. Councillor McLaren tipped me another question, which I might think. The lodges, proposed lodges, are they to be owned or rented out? And if some of it are owned, is that just partial time of the year, or is it for permanent residence? Thank you.
So the current model is a mix of both. So the majority of the current units on the site are owner occupied, with short-term lets being a smaller number. We'd anticipate a similar mix in terms of the proposed development. However, I can't really say the degree of that mix at this stage. It's market driven to a certain extent. But one thing that is sure is it's a holiday park. It's not a permanent residence. Therefore, I would expect the site license to tightly control that, and that's the way that that the park is regulated currently, and I'd anticipate that being the same moving forward. Yeah, the site won't be used for permanent residence.
Mr. Shannon, there appears to be no further questions. Thank you. You're free to go. Convener, there's no further deputations. I'll hand back to yourself.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Can I ask the committee if they have any questions for officers? Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, my question is about the holding letter from Scottish Gas, where it mentions that there was to be a further meeting about that. Is there a reason why that meeting hasn't taken place about the location of the gas pipe?
I'll answer that one for you, Bailey Williamson. Yes, you're correct. As per paragraph 25 of the report, we do have a holding objection because of the proximity of the pipeline which crosses the site. The reason a meeting hasn't taken place to date is because we indicated to Scottish Gas Networks that we were recommending refusal on other grounds. They would be willing to engage with the applicant further should the committee be minded to take an alternative route today.
Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Convener. Mr. Pan, just a quick point on paragraph 82, talks about agricultural land. I know it's not classed as prime because of it's a 3.2, but I'm just wondering, is it still used as it does say somewhere, and I can't find it now, it's still used for growing food, so is that still used as farmland?
Yes, you are correct, Councillor Braun. It doesn't meet the definition of prime agricultural use, but it is in use as agricultural for food production at this moment in time.
Do you have any more questions? Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you. You've pointed out in your presentation that this is outside the local development plan. Why is this an important issue?
Councillor Illingworth, I can answer that one for you. So first of all, I would draw your attention to paragraphs 65 and 69 of the report before you. So we are saying there is scope to an extension to this site in this location. We are aware of the constraints of the site and their limited options for extension. Our main concern here is the design and layout of what's proposed, and also when we look at that plan that's on the screen in front of us, there isn't a lot of landscaping for a development of that scale, so it will be visually intrusive. So yes, whilst it is out with the settlement boundary, that in itself is not a significant reason for refusal, because like I said, there is scope for a future expansion here. We just consider not this particular expansion.
Thank you. I see there's no further questions. Can I ask if the committee are in agreement with the report, the recommendation and report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Therefore, planning permission is refused. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to item 512, which is the formation of a leisure development comprising erection of 124 holiday accommodation units, community hub with reception, leisure, retail areas with other associated uses, formation of vehicle access, motorhome stands, suds ponds, treatment plant, parking, landscaping and associated works at Windstone Quarry, Devonshaw, Pow Mill. And to introduce the report is Mr. John Panton.
Thank you, Convener. So as stated, the next major item on the agenda today is for the formation of a holiday park at a former quarry in Devonshaw, Pow Mill. As the site is a former quarry, it is considered to be brownfield in nature. I will now take members through a short presentation to detail the proposals further. Next slide, please. For those online, we're just waiting for the slides to change in the chamber. Thank you. So here we can see the location of the site. The site is to the immediate south of the A977 and is approximately 0.5 kilometres from the hamlet of Gartwins-on-Loan and 1 kilometre from Pow Mill. The site itself measures approximately 14.1 hectares and there are 2 deep water lock-ins within the site. Next slide, please. We now have a proposed site plan. In this plan, you can see the general arrangement proposed, utilising the existing topography and surrounding the lock-ins I previously referred to. In total, 124 holiday accommodation units, a community hub with a reception, leisure and retail offering, motorhome stances, suds ponds and a treatment plant are all proposed. This is in addition to the associated landscaping, roads and path networks. Next slide, please. Over recent years, with the site no longer being in use as a quarry, nature has taken over and has resulted in a lot of vegetation and tree growth, the majority of these trees being poor quality self-seeded specimens. The Planning Authority have worked with the applicant to ensure as much of the high quality greenery is retained as possible. The pink on the current plan before you shows all of the trees and woodland that are to be retained, and the green areas show where replacement planting will be undertaken. In total, 60% of the existing woodland will be retained and 1.7 hectares of new planting will be undertaken, comprising of 4,347 new trees. Conditional control will ensure that this is implemented accordingly. Next slide, please. Here we have a typical elevation plan for one of the lodge styles proposed. There are 3 differing lodge types in a mix of 2 and 3 bedroomed units. Next slide, please. This plan now shows a typical lodge in more detail. All lodges will be finished in a brown colour to blend in with the surrounding environment. Selected lodges throughout the site will also have a decking wrapping around 2 elevations. These decking areas can be suitably controlled via planning conditions. Next slide, please. This plan shows a typical glamping pod elevation. There are 10 glamping pods proposed. 8 of these are in the higher western area and the remaining 2 are to the northern part of the site. Next slide, please. Here we have the proposed community hub. As seen, it appears as a large lodge in nature and includes a members' lounge, a small shop, a reception area, toilets and a staff room. I will now take members through a series of recent photographs where planning staff attended the site with the agent and colleagues from transportation and development. First image, please. This first image shows the approximate location of the access of the site from the A977, denoted by the red arrow. As seen, there are already relatively good visibility displays in this location. As part of the application, as well as improved access and visibility, new bus stops will be provided on either side of the road, in addition to a footpath link to the nearest village. Next image, please. This next photograph shows an existing area of hard standing within the site. This area is the approximate location of where the parking area and reception building will be. Next image, please. This next image shows some of the existing tracks within the site. For the majority, existing track routes will be utilised and upgraded. Next image, please. This photograph is now looking down on the quarry into the basin. Here you can make out how well contained the site is, which will minimise its visual and landscape impact. Next slide, please. We now have a photograph of the larger of the lock-ins. This lock-in will become a feature point of the development, with many of the lodges facing towards us. Next image, please. This photograph shows the edge of the lock-in. As you can see, the land rises significantly surrounding the lock-in, helping to minimise the visual impact of any development in this location. Next image, please. Unfortunately, due to the site being unmaintained for a significant period of time, it is now commonly used for antisocial behaviour and as an illegal dumping ground. You can see here some of the pollution and littering that has occurred. It is also worth noting that there are some vehicles sunken into the lock-in itself. This proposal therefore affords the opportunity to result in significant environmental improvements in this regard. Next image, please. Again, we see some of the littering and bonfires that have occurred on other parts of the site. Next image, please. This final photograph shows the smaller of the lock-ins on the site. Similar to the larger lock-in, Lodges will be sited to face towards this area as a feature point. Next slide, please. Thank you, convener. That now concludes my presentation. I will leave members with the proposed site plan for reference.
Thank you, Mr. Panton. We do have deputations on this item, so I'll now hand over to the Vice Convener for the deputation procedures. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Can I call on Ms. Marchant, who's representing the Fossaway District Community Council? Good morning. You'll be aware that you've got 10 minutes for your deputation. I'll give you a prompt after 9 minutes, so whenever you're ready, I'll start the clock.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here and talk on behalf of our district. So just to put it in context, my name's Nicola Marchant and I'm the chair of the Fossaway District Community Council. The Community Council in principle have supported the development of the Devonshire Quarry site. It has long been an area of concern for us for the safety of visitors who predominantly use this area in the summer months as seen on the slides. We recognise that this is an unauthorised use and this leads to litter and unsafe parking on the A977. Initially, we had made a series of neutral comments on the application, expecting that the developer could accommodate these, enhancing the biodiversity rather than maintaining it of the site and contributing towards active travel for both visitors and local residents. However, we are disappointed with their response to PKC and are therefore now lodging an objection to the development. To put the proposed development into the context of our district in Fossaway, the Fossaway district is made up of 6 small settlements, along with small groups of steadings and farms. The 2 nearest settlements are Blaringon, which has no shop, and Pow Mill, which has a very small village store. Our community has just over 950 households, so an additional 114 lodges plus 10 serviced airs will have a significant impact on our locality. In particular, we acknowledge that the developer has now submitted a revised biodiversity management plan, which now includes plans for an area that will be safeguarded containing flora that will be translocated. However, other than placing and planting native trees, we see no evidence in the biodiversity management plan that the developer has integrated nature-based solutions for the enhancement of biodiversity. Indeed, the paper they have submitted is a biodiversity management plan, not an enhancement plan. The developers promote the holiday accommodation as a rural setting, stating that visitors will choose it so that they can enjoy the countryside. Hence, we would have expected to see a greater focus on enhancing the biodiversity of the site, such as continuing to facilitate the rewilding that is ongoing of the area and not merely translocating endangered flora and planting of replacement trees. We would propose that there should be included nature corridors and allowing nature to continue to grow unrestricted, and this would support an enhanced biodiversity of the site. We believe that this can be accomplished by more careful planning and design of the site and changing the ratio of lodges to glamping pods, which could take up, therefore, less land. In summary, we object on the grounds that in its current format, the development will have an unacceptable impact on the natural environment and will not enhance the current ecosystem and therefore, in our view, contravenes National Planning Framework for Policies 3, Biodiversity, and Policy 4, Natural Places. We had also proposed for an active travel and linking the site to the local community, which the developer considers to be impossible except in the Pow Mill direction. And they have offered no solutions or opportunities for sustainable travel. We noticed that in the PKC officer's report that a new bus stop for the 202 bus service will be included. What the officer's report fails to note is that this service does not run on a Sunday, and the last bus leaves Kinross, the local town, at just after 5:15 in the evening, making it impossible for visitors to return to the site after probably a meal at local restaurants, or requiring an early return if they were to use the park and ride at Kinross to visit Edinburgh. Also, the bus service only extends to Tillicoultry, and visitors would have to make a change of buses at least once to get to the local train station at Alloa. We are also aware as a community council that local businesses along the A977 have difficulty in attracting younger and seasonal staff due to the limitations of the bus service. As the site is not accessible by dependable public transport, we would have expected and seek the developer to consider options more carefully, such as probably a developer-run minibus. We know, for example, Glen Eagles Hotel has had to put this in, and their bus picks up their staff along the A91 visiting all towns in the Ochil foothills. This would enable their employees to come to work without using a car. In addition, the minibus could be used to pick up customers and visitors from nearby train stations and provide opportunities for them to visit our local shops in Kinross and towns. In addition, local amenities cannot be assessed safely by walking or cycling unless they go into the Power Mill direction, as we acknowledge that the developer has added a path to Power Mill. In addition, the developer has incorporated cycle storage facilities, but there is no creation of cycle paths linking to the nearby cycle and pedestrian-friendly paths that we have. These can be accessed via the road to Undine, and safe access to this road would provide visitors with links that they can both walk and cycle to Dollar, Rumbling Bridge and Muckett, and could therefore limit the use of cars to access our rural location. From Dollar, a cycle path then extends to Stirling, and the footpaths from Dollar and Muckett provide hikers access to the Ochils, whilst Rumbling Bridge and Dollar provide anglers access to the River Devon. Provision of safe access route using land owned by the developer and then having further discussions with other landowners could seek a crossing to the Undine Road, we believe that this could be achievable. Without further consideration for an active travel plan, we object on the grounds that the application does not provide opportunities for sustainable travel and scope for improving transport service in this very rural area. We therefore object on the grounds that it contravenes NPF4 Policy 13, enhancing and providing active travel and infrastructure, and Policy 30 on tourism. Lastly, as a community council, we have recently provided a response to the Scottish Government's intended heating in buildings legislation. We note that the lodges have electric heating, but they also have a boiler, presumably for the hot water. If the application is approved, we would seek an additional condition that all sources of energy on the site are clean and not polluting. The addition of LPG or gas boilers to us is unacceptable when legislation is moving in the other direction. All lodges should be eco-friendly, therefore, and have additional good quality insulation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Martins. Are you willing to take questions from members? We'll just give it a moment for it to populate the chat box. Councillor Braun, we'll take your first question.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I'm happy to split these as we go along. First question, straightforward one. You mentioned enhancement of biodiversity rather than management. I understand the point you're making. It's always embarrassing. There we are. I understand the point you're making between enhancement and management. I appreciate that, and I've read the paper here and read the objections. But looking at the photograph of the site and the mess it's in, I mean, it's a car or vehicle sunk into the pool. Is the benefit of having the site cleaned up in such a way, does that not outweigh the concern? We've got biodiversity management, we've agreed that. Does the fact that the site itself is going to be upgraded and this whole antisocial behaviour moved away, does that not outweigh the point you're making about enhancement? Is it better to have the site as an improvement as it is?
Thank you for your question. I respect what you're saying. I think the issue for us is, despite that littering, then there has been some rare flora that is managed to grow across the site. Wintergreen, orchids, I can't remember the others, they're all in your documentation. And therefore we accept that they're going to be translocated and moved into a safeguarded area. But I think what I'd like to reinforce is, despite that littering, nature has managed to flourish on that site. And therefore we think that it should be enhanced. This is a rural location. It is going to be advertised as the countryside. What we don't expect to see is therefore neat lawns around lodges. We want them to be wild and to encourage that site to continue to rewild.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Morning, Nicola. You mentioned the path to Pall Mill. Could you describe that? I mean, I presume this is by the A977, which is perhaps one of the busiest roads in Perth and Kinross and carries more heavy goods vehicles than any other road that's not a trunk road. So could you describe what that's like?
Thank you. As you said, it is an extremely busy trunk road, and there is an A977 mitigation plan, which it's not a trunk road, sorry, an A977 mitigation plan, which is part the way through. Despite that, there are numerous accidents on that road. There is excessive speeding. That road, as you come out of that site, is currently 60 miles an hour. That would, in order to get to the path that is currently there, which is overgrown, and I personally wouldn't walk along it, then you would have to cross that road. So there is no safe crossing, there is no zebra crossing, there are no traffic lights. And when you do get to the path, then it is right up to the road edge. There is no barriers, no nothing. So as this is holiday accommodation for families, I do not personally believe that that would be a safe footpath. I think the footpath should be with a green barrier between them and the people, the visitors that would be walking along it.
Councillor James.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Thanks for your deputation. Very interesting. The question I have is I suppose similar similar to my colleague Councillor Braun, whereby at the moment you make quite an issue of the travel or active travel and bus timetable. Would you agree that perhaps if this site was brought back into use and cleaned up, as it certainly will do, at the moment it's very much, as you've stated, underused, but would this not encourage more use and therefore give you more ammunition, if you like, to get a better bus service, perhaps?
Very good point. That tends to be outside of our hands as regards a very good bus service. And obviously this is holiday accommodation and not a bus service that may not be commercially viable, which has been the problem in many of the rural bus services that we have. I think to me, it's actually our preference would be for the developer to have some kind of a community bus, a bus that can be called upon for when visitors come, and particularly to link into rail networks into our towns as well. The other thing about it is our settlements all have a major A road going through them, but outside of that A road, the roads off of it tend to be single track. A lot of our farms are working extremely hard to diversify. We have farm shops, we have farmers markets. They're accessible via a single track road. You're talking about 114 lodges. Each of those lodges, my understanding, has space for 2 cars, 228 cars in additions going down our single track roads, which are used by our farmers. So I would expect an active travel plan.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Nicola, for your deputation. I'm listening to your deputation and I'm hearing lots and lots of demands. Perhaps I've picked it up wrongly, but you're looking for transport systems to include cycle paths, walking routes between all communities. What are the local community doing about that problem just now? Or is this just a chance opportunity to place the responsibility elsewhere?
Thank you very much for that. The Fossaway district community has recently formed a community development trust. We became, might get my dates wrong, in May of 2023, that was formed a limited company with charitable status. We are engaging and working with PKC on forming a community action plan and raising funds for footpaths is a big thing for us. We acknowledge that, and cycle paths. So yes, the community is actively engaged in that. We are working with Glen for community bus service to actually have a community bus, and we are actually advocating and going out to get local volunteer drivers. In fact, if any of our councillors want to join us, then we have meetings of the Trust on the 19th of March, 20th of March and 26th of March in each of our village halls, and that is a key agenda item.
Councillor Brun.
Thanks again, Vice Convener. We talked about the two nearest settlements, Powmill and Blerringon. You mentioned there's a shop in Powmill, and you didn't mention any sort of cafes or pubs or whatever. I'm assuming there must be something down there. So my question really is, again, it comes back to this concept of what we're doing. We're developing the site. There's going to be an economic benefit to the area. I mean, the shop will probably do very well. I don't think there's a shop on site. We'll find out in a minute, but they will do well. Any cafes and restaurants will do well. So there's going to be an economic benefit here. You didn't mention much about that. And again, it comes back to this outweighing other things. So I thought just a comment on that for me, please.
Thank you, quite rightly. There is no facilities in Blerringon at all. There is a small village shop in Powmill, and there is also the well-known Powmill Milk Bar. So yes, there is a small shop that's intended to be on site. We do understand the economic value to us. There is no pub or anything, and that's why the active transport links is so important to us, because in order to get visitors to places, you can't walk there. So yeah, to our farmers markets, to our farmers cafes, they are all down very narrow rural roads. So yes, we accept that there is an economic value. One of the concerns really is the size and dimension of this, the number of lodges.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Yeah, going back to the bus service, it would help, I think, if you could explain or describe the current state of the bus service. And just before you start, just to say to Councillor Allen that there's a lot of work going into community transport in Kinrossshire. The Glenfarr Community Transport Group was mentioned at least 3 times in the budget speeches because it is working, and we are looking to roll out the same model in Fossaway, and Fossaway are working in that direction. So there is moves afoot. But if you could describe the current status of the 202 service.
Thank you. Yes, I had redesigned, but as you've requested it, the 202 bus service as it stands is not reliable. Buses break down, children are left on the roadside when trying to get to school, people missing doctor's appointments. It is on the agenda item of every monthly community council meeting. We are working extremely hard with PKC to resolve that. However, we are, as Councillor Cuthbert has said, starting to say as a community, maybe it's time we take on responsibility for this, as one of the other colleagues had said as well, and we are actively doing so.
Councillor Brun.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I'm coming back to this question of active travel as well now. I think realistically, most people who go here would be driving a car to get to it, most probably. And you talk about active travel. I know this comes into this question of climate change, but my point I'm trying to make is that cars are changing rapidly. Electric cars, hydrogen cars is on the horizon, if not with us. And even an ordinary petrol car now can do in excess of 55, 60 miles to the gallon. So my point is, you can't keep blaming cars for it. You can't keep worrying about cars. I mean, they're going to be there. We are car driving, car loving nation. That's it. End of story. And we are changing. So is the point about active travel that desperate, I suppose, because if cars are non-polluting, let's put it that way, to keep it general, is it really a problem?
Thank you. I totally agree with what you're saying. The cars are changing. Hopefully they will be clean in the future. However, it's also the number of cars. We have very narrow single track roads without passing places. So it's the volume as well as and that's why active travel will ensure that rather than 10 cars leaving the site to go and have pizza, then 1 bus leaves the site to travel into Kinross to drop the holidaymakers to go and get pizza.
Ms. Martin, there appears to be no further questions, so thank you for your time, and you're free to go.
Thank you very much for your time.
Could I please call on Ms. Plass, objector? Good morning. I'm sure you're aware that you've got 10 minutes for your deputation, and I'll give you a prompt after 9 minutes. So in your own time.
Thank you for letting me speak today. So I'm Carolyn Pless. I'm a land economy graduate with a master's degree in tourism, chartered surveyor, and I farm at Devonshire Farm. I have many concerns in connection with the planning application, but I don't intend to repeat all of my comments. Is it? So yeah, okay. Can you hear me now? Yeah. I have many concerns in connection with the planning application, but I don't intend to repeat all of my comments, which are available on the planning website. Today, I wish to cover 3 main points: safety, environmental impact, and the sewage system. So firstly, safety issues. You've seen the site visit, which must have been done when the leaves were on the trees. You don't actually see the dangerous cliffs. So the quarried area, although it has a certain charm, which is spoiled by problems with fly tipping and littering, is extremely dangerous due to high vertical cliffs, which appear to be unstable in areas, and the deep quarry ponds. These are not natural hazards. They've been man-made by quarrying. The quarry is not a safe holiday or family destination. The barriers of scrub, woodland, and difficult access, which currently protect all but the most determined of users, are to be removed by the development process. The business plan is not made available to me, but I understand that the success of the development depends on attracting family groups. However, none of the usual facilities to encourage family groups, such as an on-site swimming pool or a restaurant, are provided. There doesn't even appear to be the intention to provide significant dedicated paths for walking and cycling within the site. And there are to be vehicular roads to the chalets throughout the site, involving steep gradients. The nearest villages of Pow Mill and Blairengone have very limited attractions, with the milk bar at Pow Mill, in common with the local farm cafes and coffee shops, not open in the evenings. The proposed multi-use path to Pow Mill, which you've heard about already, the developer thought the A977 was a quiet country road. The planning report suggests that the path is acceptable, despite being a hazardous route, as the visitors will be aware of the risk associated in using it. Under the planning report, accessing the public bus service, assuming the 202 service survives, will involve a hazardous crossing of the A977, either on the way out or the way back to the chalet site. Condition 7 states that bus shelters will be provided at and opposite the site entrance. Rural bus boarders will be at either side of the A977, and there is also to be a ghost lane at the access point to the site. This means that to reach the bus shelter on the north side of the A977, visitors will have to cross the road over 2 lanes of fast traffic and an additional ghost lane, which potentially have traffic waiting to turn in or out of the site. The through traffic often breaks the 60-mile-an-hour limit and suddenly appears from the west round a corner or from the east over a summit. In the winter, it will be dark, both for the first and last 2 buses. There is also often ice on the road in winter, and it rains frequently. As far as danger is concerned, I believe the site is inherently dangerous, especially for children and the infirm. Provision of a risky path to Pow Mill, which is meant to provide a link to local facilities, is not sensible, and the suggested location of the proposed bus stops is lethal. Secondly, the environmental impact. In terms of the proposal meeting planning policies, it is my understanding that it is necessary for the applicant to show that the development will ensure a significant enhancement to biodiversity. I fundamentally disagree with the planner's opinion that this has been shown. The site has naturalised and regenerated since the quarrying ceased in 1970. The proposed development will undo more than 50 years of nature's work in remediating the quarried areas, and will destroy areas which were never quarried and contain rare plants and flowers. Construction work, including removal of 18.9 acres of woodland and the use of the site by holidaymakers, will inevitably cause significant disruption to wildlife, such as the pine marten, birds, amphibians and bats. The limited proposed new planting and bird and bat boxes, even if successful long term, will not compensate for the environmental devastation caused, never mind enhance existing biodiversity. The conditions relating to road visibility splays and the increased width of the path to Pow Mill are likely to require removal or hard pruning of trees and plants. The environmental impact of these conditions does not appear to have been considered. Thirdly, and finally, a private sewage system is proposed due to there being no public system available. The lack of an available public system is not surprising given the rural location, isolated from public services. I sought advice from SEPA as I was concerned that the proposed sewage discharge would overwhelm my farm field drainage system. SEPA replied to me last week and advised that as the watercourse to be discharged into is small, with hardly any upstream catchment, it is unlikely to be sufficient to support a discharge of the size outlined in the planning application. Given the above and the apparent lack of local support for the proposals and the objections received, and I would ask that the committee members, if they haven't already done so, actually visit the site themselves to have a look, because from the details I've seen, and it's a very difficult site to photograph, to actually see what is there and the high cliffs and the danger that I'm talking about. Because in my view, if the council grants planning permission for this proposed development, the council will be morally, if not legally, responsible for any accidents, loss or life or harm caused. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Plass. Are you willing to take questions from members? We'll give it a moment for the chat box to be populated. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and thank you for your deputation. I noted from your deputation there were lots and lots of objections there. Do you see any benefit from the proposal at all?
It's not. Is that it on? Yeah. The unauthorised use by young children in the summer, which is generally, it'll be 2 or 3 days if it's sunny in the summer. So that terrifies me because they come in and they swim in the deep lagoon, and they also tend to have a drink and they've parked on the main road and you hear the traffic beeping as they're getting in and out of their cars. So if that was stopped, that would obviously be a benefit. The fly tipping is also an issue. But I farm in the area. I have to manage antisocial behaviour and fly tipping. I do it different ways. I pick it up when we just clear fly tipping. We create barriers. We put gates in. There's other ways of managing it. You don't need to develop a site in order to manage fly tipping. It's difficult, but it's perfectly possible to do.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Thanks for your deputation. You've partly answered my question, but I'm just wondering if I can get you just to enhance it a bit more. It's just the report does list the use of people currently using the site and what they're doing, it, whether it's bouldering or various other things. I wonder if you can just enhance on that a little bit more. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't notice any bouldering causing any problems or antisocial behaviour. The issue locally is if it's on a hot summer's day in the evening, the buzz gets around and the local kids, and from further afield, Dunfermline, Alloa, because they can't find the quarry, so they'll ask us for instructions how to get there. Our standard response is to give them a lecture about how dangerous it is, how cold the water is, how deep the quarry pond is. So generally in the summer, last summer wasn't a very good summer. So a couple of days maybe, occasionally phone the police, they'll come out, shout at the kids go away and it clears up, nothing, they don't come back for a few weeks. So it's very weather dependent.
Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Vice Convener, and thank you for your deputation. You mentioned a lot about safety, and that the swimming areas or the pools are man-made. Would you not agree that any developer, whoever it might be, whatever they're developing, they would put sufficient barriers in, safety barriers in, to protect people from falling into these things? I mean, that would be a health and safety issue that they would have to comply with to protect people from falling off cliffs or whatever. There would be something put in place, surely.
Well, you might think so, but that doesn't have anything. There's no way to stop the public. I mean, it is a quarry. It is dangerous, you know, so there's no fences. They're putting the chalets at the edge of a deep quarry pond. I wouldn't let my children go anywhere near. We've lived with that quarry in the area. My daughter used to get texts from her friends, we're going up to the Blue Lagoon. And she would text them back, don't be stupid, you will die. It's a perception of danger, I suppose.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and thank you for your deputation. You mentioned during your deputation about the wildlife that's presently found in this, but looks a fairly well established kind of wildlife refuge now. You mentioned pine martens and bats and things like that. Can you give me a broader detail of what kind of wildlife you're finding there?
It's actually my neighbour who's not able to be present, who lives at Craig End, that's filmed the wildlife. But in the area, I think if you read the reports in the planning report, various animal, when they were surveying the site, they found evidence or saw a pine marten. And in the area, it's well known, there's pine martens, red squirrels. There's a huge amphibian population. So there's already frog spawn in the ponds and things. So it's a naturalised site. It's and because it doesn't actually currently get much disturbance, there is fly tipping at the entrance to the site, but the fly tippers don't generally go up to the quarry ponds. That's the kids in the summer. So all that litter that you see is from years of kids going up there swimming and taking a drink and having a barbecue.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Thank you for your presentation. You've mentioned quite a bit the dangers of the lochans on the site. What makes them dangerous? Is it the depth? Is it the steepness of the banks? I mean, what actually makes them dangerous?
Well, in my opinion, what makes them dangerous is the one that they call the smaller lochen. That isn't particularly deep, I don't think. It's a bit extended from what's shown on the plan. When I went this week, I think actually some of the chalets might find they're in water because it's a bit bigger in the winter. But the big quarry pond, that is where they actually quarried. So at the front there's like a ramp in, and I understand the local police used to come and practice diving in it because it was so deep they could practice trying to recover bodies and things from deep water. It's very, very cold. There's very sharp, it's steep cliff edges. So if you get in and you get into trouble, I don't quite know how you get out. There's boulders in it. At the bottom of the cliff faces, there's boulders. The cliffs aren't stable, so there's bits fall off. If you look in the quarry basin, there's great big boulders around the bottom. It's sheer. So nature over time is getting it to a normal angle. Yeah.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Thanks for your presentation. I'm just trying to establish whether or not you think that the quarry, the danger posed by the quarry would be more dangerous in its present state or in its potentially developed state.
As a farmer who has to do risk assessments, I would say because you're inviting the public, you are responsible for their health and safety. If people choose to go there currently, they're a bit more responsible for their own welfare. And I think if it's going to encourage family groups, you're introducing young children. If it's a holiday setting, you're likely to have a drink. And it's just going to be a much more intensive use. So I don't like the kids going there currently. But the reality is you're talking about 20 to 30 kids, 3 to 4 summer evenings a year. Whereas this is going to be presumably occupied all year round with a lot more people.
Thank you, Ms. Plass. There's no further questions. You're free to go. Oh. Sorry, Miss Plass, we've had a late entry from Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. It was just on your kind of last answers there. Have there been any incidents of note, say that have been reported injuries, even fatalities within this area?
The ones I know of is there was a fatality, but that was a suicide years ago. There's been injuries with kids playing with cars years ago, before it was as much woodland. When it was easier to get in, kids used to come with their cars, and there was one accident where there was a telegraph pole that had been cut off, and the car hit the telegraph pole, and the kids came through and lifted the front of their face off because it's quite steep. Other than that, we get the odd scramblers and stuff, but I'm not aware of any accidents, no.
I think we're here now. Thank you for your deputation. Can I call on Mr. Davidson, Director of Devonshaw Leisure Limited, Mr. McCallum of GM Planning Services. And I believe you might be accompanied with Mr. Kechney and Mr. Quinn. I presume you, Mr. Davidson? Mr. McCallum? Okay. Mr. McCallum, you have 10 minutes for your deputation. I will give you a prompt after 9, so whenever you're ready, I'll start the clock.
Thank you. Just to clarify, we're doing a bit of a hybrid presentation here, but thank you, convener, for the opportunity to speak to the committee today. I'm John McCallum, planning consultant and the agent. Yep, sorry. I am John McCallum, planning consultant and the agent for the application. The applicant, Devonshaw Leisure Limited, is represented here today by directors Keith Davidson, David Quinn and Scott McKechnie. Keith is also CEO of development company Easy Living Developments, based in Fife. Scott is also technical director of ELD. I will now pass to Keith to speak first, to outline what is hoped will be helpful and useful background information leading up to the planning process. Then I'll speak again to complete our overall presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name's Keith Davidson, and as John mentioned there, I'm the CEO of Easy Living Developments and the Director of Devonshire Leisure. Give you a little bit of background on who we are and what we do. Easy Living Developments is a property development company and a house builder based in Fife. We predominantly do all our work in Fife, however, we have spread our wings up into Dundee, where we've rebuilt and knocked down shopping centres, and did the same in Glenrothes, where we bought M&S to Glenrothes and various other shops. And we've also constructed property development sites, including a 168 residential development in Lochgelly, and therefore regenerated that area. Currently, we're building houses in a 100-site unit at East Weems near Kirkcaldy, and another site we've just started at the Colton of Balgony for another 80 units. Interestingly, we have spread our wings into Perth and Kinross a little bit, in so much as we rebuilt and landscaped the car park down by Lochleven in Kinross. And we've also invested in Lochleven Brewery for my sins and for medicinal purposes. I'm also the managing director of that little company as well. So we do have interest in the area and looking to expand that as well. Just to keep up to date with where we are with the ownership of the site and how we came about it, Tarmac were the last, as was previously mentioned, the last corporate owners and operations of the site, and we understand that quarry operations ceased, we believed, actually in the early 1980s. It may well have been in the 1970s, as you previously said, though. Right, okay. Tarmac subsequently sold the site to a Mr. Ronald Patterson in 1989, but retained the mineral extraction rights along with a charge over the site so that they could potentially benefit from any future development of the site. Mr. Patterson then subsequently sold the bottom 10 acres of the site and gave the proceeds to one of his children and gifted the rest of the site to his other son, Roy, who was then a serving army officer. Roy then planned to set up an outward bound leisure venture on the site and subsequently obtained planning permission for a leisure use on the site and also a small development of 4 houses. However, due to severe family illnesses, the development was never fully pursued and the site was put up for auction in November 2014, not 1914. That was when we bought the site at auction. I must admit on a whim as well, and we were looking actually more at the residential development side of it and that. But at the time of the purchase, as you've seen from some of the photographs there, the site was already in a state of fairly disrepair. And I see that the previous person mentioned that the site is only used 3 or 4 times a year by children. That's not our experience. Certainly from when the sun starts to come out, even from now onwards, there's wild camping going on there. And there was one recently, in much as a couple of weeks ago, just camping there, although they weren't youths, they were other people there. But as soon as the sun comes out from May onwards, right up until the October holiday, the site actually has quite a number of children and youth and antisocial behaviour, which has actually called out the local constabulary on many occasions. And more recently, the fire brigade have been in there to put out quite large fires that have been set up. But considering all that, we then came to the conclusion that the best way forward for this site is perhaps not as residential, but as a leisure site. I'll be totally honest with you, it's probably the best site I've ever come across in my whole career. At looking at somewhere for leisure. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's like a piece of utopia when you're down in the quarry area. No one else can see you. Even if it's wind blowing elsewhere, it can be nice and calm in there. And the lochen, as the larger lochen that you saw there, one end it will be, if we get permission, a nice sandy beach area where you can walk in slowly, and the other sides will have lodges around them overlooking the thing. And when you consider sort of safety elements like this, what happens when you go to the sea side and there's cliffs and things like that? You know, we have to have a bit of reality in our things. And there are some cliff faces on the site. Some of them are sloping and that, and others aren't even accessible because they lead right into the water. So yes, we would have to maintain the area, look after it, and obviously try and maintain health and safety there with fencing and various other methods. But we're not really a nanny state. You have to allow people into water. You have to allow people to do various things. So that would be our process in going forward on the site. You may recall I mentioned Tarmac there. Tarmac did actually retain a charge over the site, which would severely impede its future going forward, in as much as they would retain a profit share of anything going forward. It then took us approximately 3 years and a significant amount of money to buy their overage option out, and thus allow us to take it forward in a sensible manner. In doing so, we also had to look at the bottom 10 acres, which was owned by 2 parties at the time, one Mr. David Quinn and then another gentleman. We managed to buy the other gentleman out and have succeeded in doing a joint venture with David, and he's formed a company, DQSL, which is David Quinn and his partner, Sandra Love. Oddly enough, this is the first joint venture I've ever been involved in where both parties have actually done what they said they would do. And we formed a very good relationship, although we never knew each other before. And I'm very pleased to say that when either side has asked one of the other parties to do something, we've actually jumped and done it and moved forward on that basis. We've invested a considerable sum of money in taking this forward and undertaken probably more studies than I've ever come across in a development in my experience, including DNA tests of all the water to prove what amphibians and what other animals actually do exist in the area, and have done the full fauna flora tests throughout the whole year to prove what actually is there. And interestingly enough, there is a site right on the edge of, which is in our ownership, which is roughly 10 acres, which is a triple SI, which is where the vast majority of these rare orchids and other ferns do actually grow in. And that has to be monitored. And we've met with SNH Scotland and have a monitoring and a process to look after that site. And indeed, I'm very thankful to Carolyn as she lets her animals graze on that particular area to keep the grass down, which has to be kept down to look after these various orchids. It's also worthy of note that the current owner of the top end of the site, who is an objector as well, before he purchased the site, he approached us. He's actually a property developer himself, funny enough. He approached us and asked us exactly what the boundaries were so he could establish his ownership where it came to the edge of the quarry. And then, interesting enough, asked if he could do a joint venture with us or even buy the quarry out. The answer to that, we were already involved with David, which is working very well for us, and therefore no. But that is also just, I thought I'd bring that up there. When we come to the transport links as well, we also asked the local landowner, one of which is Carolyn, and another gentleman by Sorry. We asked the local landowners and Mr. Black and there if they would allow us to have access of approximately 100 yards south of the site, which would lead to the road, which goes round the southern area, and also therefore would be another route into Powell Mill. And there's also some lovely walks over the top there that are established there. But the landowners refused to that and mentioned to us they would actually oppose the development in any way, shape or form, although they acknowledged that it already did have a leisure and approval and various other things. We also put in our business plan, in our business plan that we would look at the option of putting a minibus on the site. And initially that was poo-pooed by the local area people, but that is something we will still look at doing, is put a minibus connection so we can do exactly what you mentioned there. And what I'll do now is I'll pass back over to John. Does John get 10 minutes? Great. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, if I could just pick up on the sort of planning issues and planning background to the application, I'll go on from there. A formal pre-application process with the council was commenced in March 2021, which is almost 3 years ago to the day. Extensive discussions then took place with planning officials and their colleagues for advice on how to move forward with a proposal that would meet all planning requirements. The advice received in response to the pre-app process and to the PAN, as reported to your planning committee at the time, was influential in understanding the level of detail needed to support a major application. The extent of work undertaken includes transport assessment, ecological impact assessment with numerous wildlife surveys, sustainability assessment, landscape and visual assessment, drainage strategy, design and access statement, supporting planning statement, and, as alluded to earlier, a business plan, which was obviously confidential, which was informed by a marketing appraisal and tourism and leisure options appraisal and feasibility study. The business plan concluded that the proposals would add to and complement existing tourist facilities in the local area, not detract from them. The applicant has complied with requests for supporting information, and the proposals are thorough, detailed and comprehensive. The pre-application consultation process in March 2022 was undertaken in line with the Council's and Scottish Government's guidelines, and the details are all contained in the supporting PAC report, as required. It generated largely positive feedback at the time via consultation website. Overall, responses to the required 2 online consultation events were very low, out of 194 single website visits. 12 out of the 16 feedback forms received from the first event, the first online event, which is 75%, reacted positively to the outline proposals presented at the time for the site, with specific comments welcoming the opportunity to clean the site up, as we've already touched on, making it more accessible and protecting and improving the wildlife habitat and biodiversity of the location. 2 responders were opposed and 2 were neutral. More firm proposals were presented at the second online consultation event, and it generated an even lower amount of comment, with only 8 feedback forms completed, 3 in favour, 3 against and 2 neutral comments. Set across both consultation events, 15 out of 24 feedback forms received, which equates to 63%, were in favour. The overall opposition ratio was 5 responders out of 194 unique website visits, equating to approximately 2.6% opposition from those who engaged with the 2 events. There appears to be a similarly low number of only 8 representations for the application that was submitted itself. To summarise, the majority of the feedback was positive from a wide cross-section of those who visited the website, demonstrating that there was more support for the proposals than against them within the local community, which includes residents and local businesses, via this online consultation process. As we've heard, the Fossaway and District Community Council were initially supportive and indicated that they were most keen for the site and the proposed development to be linked with the local area, both in a physical sense by a path and in terms of potential job opportunities for local people. The proposals have been prepared with both those linkages being central to the plans now in the application. The physical link between the site and Pow Mill can be achieved by forming 2 new footways along the A977 to meet the existing footway on the north side of the road. This has been accepted and therefore the Council's and Community Council's objectives can both be met. Regrettably, the adjacent landowners were reluctant to engage positively with the applicant to facilitate any alternative type of path link to Pow Mill. In terms of some specific aspects of the proposals, as detailed in the officer's report, I thought I would add some further clarity. Improved woodland creation. Of all woodland removal proposed, 90% equates to those areas that are within the low and moderate category of woodland and trees, as detailed in the tree impact assessment. All high-quality woodland areas and mature tree specimens are to be retained. The submitted woodland planting plan and a separate landscape plan propose that, in addition to all the retained areas of woodland, 1.7 hectares of replacement woodland will be created, with the added benefits of these areas having improved soils, being subject to management by way of planned thinning, and types of tree plants being a better quality and of a varied mix of native species. Creating approximately 17,400 square metres of new woodland involves a substantial amount of new tree planting, which I think has been qualified as 4,000, and demonstrates the applicant's commitment to regenerating the site to help complement the high-quality visitor destination they are seeking to achieve. Public access. The applicant can confirm that the facility will be open to the public for unhindered pedestrian and vehicular access, and that the public would not be prevented from entering the facility as it will not be gated. Furthermore, car parking spaces are included within the proposals close to the entrance to assist with making access and parking easier for such visitors, in order to avoid the parking on the A977 roadside, as presently occurs and which is unsafe, thereby removing an existing road safety hazard. Sustainable transport has been mentioned. In addition to the proposed active travel benefits to visitors in terms of walking and cycling opportunities from the proposed development, and to make the development even more appealing in terms of sustainable transport options, the applicant welcomes the suggestion by planning and transportation officials for bus stops to be installed on the A977 adjacent to the site entrance, and is agreeable to a condition for these to be provided at the appropriate time as part of the proposals. And indeed, the applicant offered the prospect of a community bus as well, or a bus to take people to the local area, and that still remains, as Keith has mentioned. So to conclude, the application can be supported by the development plan, including NPF 4, and so the recommendation to approve the application is welcomed by Devonshire Leisure Limited, which they believe is a culmination of the substantial amount of work put in by all involved in the preparation of their proposals. They respectfully request, Convener, that your committee agrees with the recommendation and grants planning permission for this new visitor accommodation facility that has the potential to significantly contribute to the local and national tourist economy, suitably adding to other existing successful assets in the tourism sector in the Perth and Kinross area. Keith, David, Scott and I would be pleased to answer any questions you and your committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCallum. We'll give it, there's some questions coming in. Could I ask your colleagues to join you rather than talking from the public seating area? While your colleagues are coming up, can I ask first question from Councillor Waters?
Thank you, Vice Convener. Thanks for your deputation. Just at the end of the deputation there, you mentioned the community bus. I'm not quite sure what the statement you were making over it, but given the importance of creating sustainable transport, if we were minded to pass this application and you proceeded, is there more scope in what you can do and offer as an ongoing, if the community are successful in setting up the community bus, is there something you can do in the way of a community benefit type thing to make that a more sustainable option, both for the community and I would imagine for your proposals as well? Thank you.
I think what's been demonstrated here today is that Devonshire Leisure Limited are a company who engage and work collaboratively with people. And I think the idea of a community bus being extended for use from their site is feasible. I'll maybe let Keith answer that in more detail, but certainly the proposal was initially to offer a private bus operating from the site to the local area. But again, these things are open to discussion. As I say, the company is open to speaking with local parties and the council to get the right solution in the end.
That's exactly right, and we've actually visited other sites, and there's one in particular just outside of St Andrews, approximately 5 miles outside, which set up a lovely development there, but they realised they were outside of St Andrews and couldn't get in, so they have provided there a bus service in the form of they purchased a minibus and allow their clients to go in and out of St Andrews at given times to do that. And that's the sort of thing we would propose as well. We would purchase a minibus and have regulated times to and from the site and that sort of thing, and particularly some later on, which could also stop in some of the local communities, depending on how full it is, obviously. And we would negotiate and liaise with the community to see how best that could be utilised for the overall benefit of the area.
Just a quick supplementary, please, Vice Convener, if that's okay. Just on the terminology of community bus, when we often chat about community bus, it's kind of often something that's owned by the community as such. And it would be more, my question was more kind of around whether you would, if Fossaway set up their own community bus service similar to what we've seen in Glenfarg, and I assume given your involvement in Kinross that you've heard of the Glenfarg one, which is kind of run and owned by the community. But if there was potential within that on a community benefit, that you would support that type of venture for employees getting to work, for other, for visitors getting into to local attractions or activity areas or stuff like that. Thank you.
Most definitely, that's something we would look at and welcome and liaise, and particularly as you mentioned, I think it was mentioned earlier about staff at the previous application coming to and from site. We realise we are separated and most people will travel to us by car. So having a community bus service or a bus service run by us or supported jointly is something we will definitely look at and we will very willing to support.
Thank you.
Councillor Illingworth.
Great, thank you. Quick question, hopefully. How wide is the path going to be from the site to Gat, Winds and Lone?
From the site, it's 2 metres on the south side of the A977 and 1 metre probably for about 2/3 of the way into Pow Mill. That's existing, sorry.
Councillor Braun.
I'll split these again. Must be my lucky number today, 3. Safety issues, coming back to that point, it was heavily mentioned in one of the objectors. And I agree with the point, we don't want a nanny state, of course. But from what I can hear, there'll have to be some sort of safety issue put in place. I just wonder if you could expand on that. Just tying into that a little bit, you mentioned with the large area, you're going to make like a beach area at one end, which would encourage swimming. So I'm assuming the water will be drained and replaced because it can be heavily contaminated at the moment. So I just wonder if you could, with that, will give you a chance to lay out more what's below the waterline, I would presume.
Currently, the water isn't contaminated, although and it's extremely clear. Funny enough, it's 18 meters deep at the deepest point, and you can actually see some of the vehicles that were deposited in there many years ago. There's an old Mini, an old caravan, and some other vehicles you can see there. And there's no evidence thus of any seepage of oil or otherwise. However, we would remove those vehicles, and if there was any seepage at the time, deal with it. But at the other end of the thing, the pond, it does come out, and it's not very wide at that spot, but it would form a really quite nice beach for things, people like paddle boarders or that sort of thing to launch from.
Just a supplementary on that, but the other areas we've heard about the cliffs and that, where would there be some sort of barriers in place in those most dangerous areas?
Yes, we had looked at making a walkway all around the top, which would lead up round to Craig End, which is where the other house is at the top end of the thing. We've dismissed that, and we will fence that area off. That's the particularly sheer, if you like, a bit of the old quarry bits. But the other areas are less severe, and actually you can walk up and down a considerable amount of them. But the areas that are really steep and that sort of thing will be fenced.
Bailey Williamson.
Thank you very much, Karina. My question is a bit of a technical one. I noticed that there's a Japanese knotweed report in the and I'm finding it hard to overlay where the Japanese knotweed is against your suds, which is just to the right of the gate, and they appear pretty close together. You have got measures in there which suggest that you're going to be monitoring or digging out that ground for 10 years. But my concern is what measures have been taken to prevent any potential root ingress into the suds going down the line?
Japanese knotweed does traditionally has quite long roots, but the recommendations that we had from that to look after it was basically leave it where it is and secure it in the area and don't dig it up. There are several ways you can put what is known as teram or barriers around it, to dig a trench if you like and put that sort of thing around it. To be totally honest with you, we haven't finalised how we're going to deal with that, and that is one thing we will take forward once we come to the development, and it'll probably be a barriered site, and we will not be removing the knotweed from that area.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Yes, the path next to the A977, I've walked along next to the 977. It can be pretty horrific with the large vehicles going by. There was mention of alternative routes. I think the Arndine Road was mentioned, for example. Did you consider other routes, and is there a reason why they weren't sort of picked up as potential routes?
Thank you. Yeah, effectively the site is landlocked, and the ownership around the site prevents any other routes unless an agreement can be reached with those landowners. And despite numerous attempts to engage with those landowners to try and facilitate some sort of path that would lead further to the south onto Craig End Road, then lead into Pow Mill that way, there was no further discussions on that, and hence we looked at the other alternative ways of overcoming that issue.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and thank you for your deputation. Can you just explain for everybody here a wee bit more about the reception, leisure and retail areas, what they are going to be and how they can impact on both your development and the local community? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. We again, I refer back to where we went and visited many other sites, and this particular one near St Andrews as well, where they'd invested about £1.5 million in a large leisure suite, including a golf internal driving area and a reception where they were hoping to have wedding receptions and various other things. And until the site met a critical mass, it was actually loss leading. More than loss leading, it was costing them a fortune. So our approach having listened to them, and their approach was initially when you set the site up, look at a much smaller operation whereby it's ideally set for the people that are using the site itself initially. And as the site expands and grows, we could look to making further applications and making it eventually into something like a wedding venue or something like that, where, as mentioned previously, there could be a restaurant, coffee shop, all these sort of things incorporated, and perhaps even going ahead, depending on how the site goes and this sort of thing. This is utopia for us. You must understand that if this did happen, then we would establish those sort of things and make it a nice wedding venue. It could possibly even be a farm shop area, and we have had discussions with Lochleven's Larder over a potential putting something like what they've got there and that. But that is all in the future, depending on how the site goes. And I have to be honest with you, there will be an element of suck it and see on that to see how we go. Thank you.
So just elaborate for me, what are you going to do at the outset?
Sorry, at the outset, as was shown on one of the early slides, we're going to have an enlarged lodge in the area, which will act as a reception, an owner's lounge with toilets and that sort of facility, and a small shop. When I say small shop, papers, milk and that sort of thing, not anything that. And in fact, we actually spoke with the local shop owner in the town. He's delighted with it coming there to get more business and that sort of thing. So, thanks.
Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Vice Convener. To really expand on Councillor Waters' question and about the minibus, you're saying that you may put a minibus in yourself with a timetable. Would this minibus be open to members of the community to get on the bus if they were wanting to go to Kinross or wherever your minibus was going?
Thank you for your question. Yes, is the answer. And I have to be honest again, if it wasn't already full with people from the proposed site, because if it's already full with people who have paid money to come there, and then it's passing through Pall Mill or something on the way, then there isn't going to be room for them. But if there is room for them, then by all means, yes, and we would liaise with the local community in that respect.
Bailey McLaren.
Yeah, thank you. I would just like to, could you expand a bit further on the economic impact? You know, you're saying that there's a positive economic impact on the rural economy, and then there's the equivalent, the spend of 3.5 million could equate to 53 jobs. Is that kind of, would that be 53 full-time jobs, or is this at a sales period? Will you envisage having full-time caretakers, people on site? Could you just quantify this a bit further? Thank you.
Yes, we would propose. I'm now taken to the state where the site is fully occupied, because the 53 jobs is obviously not at the very beginning. That would be ramped up, and that again is when we've achieved, if you like, almost utopia, in so much as we've got a coffee shop on site, we've got a restaurant, and we've got people looking after that, administering that, and also, you know, if we manage to achieve going forward the idea of a wedding venue or something like that, which venues can be used for that. And the reason I keep banging on about wedding venues is my son's looking for a venue to get married and can't find one without about a 2-year waiting list. That's just an aside. But we would have a full-time maintenance team in there, which would consist of people looking after the grounds, and obviously they would maintain any security. By security, I'm also meaning security of the fences to stop people falling over the cliffs, that type of thing. We'd have to have an administration team, but we've also had negotiations, or not negotiations, that's wrong, early discussions with outside operators such as Sykes, which is the UK's largest operator of independent parks. They don't own the parks, they just operate them, but they provide a team that does all the administration and things for people, and they have a team based on site as well, which is made up of locals that they've trained to the administration of the lodges, visitors, all that type of thing, advertising and promotion of the same. So The answer is yes, but not initially. We would ramp up, and if we get 53 people in there, it'll mean the site's working as we envisage, and we'll all be delighted, I hope.
Councillor Prawn.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I wasn't expecting that quick. Second question then comes back to a point raised, I think it was Miss Marchant in the objection, and she talked about the style of the lodges and the installation. So my question, there's three parts, I suppose, really is the installation of the lodges, is that satisfactory? She talked about the balance of pods with lodges. I can understand that may be an economic reason that the balance is set as it is. But perhaps more importantly, she talked about them being, the energy being LPG. Could an alternate source be used? As she pointed out, that's not probably climate friendly. That'd be electric, I suppose, really. So that's just 3 points on there.
Interestingly, you mentioned that we were the Easy Living Developments were the first reasonable sized development company to have a site, and this was of 55 units. It was the old maternity hospital in Kirkcaldy in Fife that we bought off the NHS, and that was the first site in East of Scotland which was actually without gas, and it was solely with solar panels and air source heat pumps. So we were the first large company to use air source heat pumps. It is something we are considering from this site, but it's also important to know that the lodges will be to residential specifications and fully insulated. We are looking at air source heat pumps for there, and also solar panels to be put on the roof. That hasn't been fully determined yet because air source, as you may be aware, is slightly more expensive than the traditional stuff. Interestingly, as a company, we're also the site I mentioned that we're developing for 80 units at the Colton of Balgony. We're the first large units also to make this as a district heat system from ground source heat pumps, where we're drilling holes down 180 meters into the earth to get the ground source heat and coming up on that. It may be more difficult at this site because it's solid rock. And that's one of the reasons the quarry closed, because the rock was actually too hard for the local roadstone to be crushed. Thanks.
Excuse me, Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Next question on to the biodiversity and especially the SSSI site, which is in your ownership but not within the red line area of this application, but still, in my view, still a very important part of your application going forward. Officers have a condition in there for a hedge to kind of protect or hopefully ensure that there's no access onto it. Can you just give me some details what kind of hedge you would propose to put up, and especially how you're going to protect it while the hedge grows, and anything else relating to that you're going to do to ensure that it isn't compromised in any way with the development? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in terms of species to try and keep people out, gorse was suggested, but actually gorse is not a suitable species for that location next to SSSI. So there will be other means of using native species for hedging in that location. In terms of managing that, you know, all the new planting will be appropriately fenced off. And for the young species to establish, but yeah, effectively it will be a significant enough barrier to ensure that, you know, people will not see it as a route to get through to the next field.
Thank you.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I just want to clarify the role that SEPA are taking, or the stance that SEPA are taking. According to the papers, they had no objections, but one of the previous objector mentioned correspondence you'd had from SEPA. Could you maybe expand on that?
Thank you. I think so. Obviously, SEPA are a statutory consultee as part of this application, and they would have responded to the development proposals. I believe the other adjacent landowner approached them separately with that process, so may have sought other advice and been given that advice. But certainly for the application, confirmation from the council was that SEPA had no objection.
Okay, thank you. Just a wee supplementary advice. from experience tell your son to elope?
Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. I'm just sort of a supplementary on the answer you gave me to my previous question. So you are investigating or looking into possibly not actually running the site yourself and employing people directly. That will be slightly out with your control as to where the employment is sourced.
Sorry, no, what I was speaking, yes, what I was meaning with sites is they're not the running of the site, but they're the promoters, operators of if you like, the people that get you in, the advertisers, that type of thing. We would control the management of the site itself, the maintenance of it, and all that sort of thing. That's what we're invoiced in. But we're not. I freely admit we're not well versed. Although David has significant interest in the leisure industry, he's an Octorada basic, very successful businessman with both property and other types of businesses, including a large motorhome business as well. But we personally are not well versed in advertising and promoting these sort of things. So you bring in another company to do that. But the actual maintenance of the lodges and everything else itself would rest with us.
Councillor Braun.
Thanks very much. A much quicker question. Talking about cars, electric cars, in the report says there will be 2 locations within the site, main reception and near Lodge 27. So I just want to check how many charging points will be at each location. And would it be better not to spread them around, because you can have cars whizzing around the site trying to find charging points in due course, of course?
You're exactly right. There is limited charging points put on that plan and everything, but we were actually looking at and more recently at putting potentially, I say potentially, a charging point at each unit, so that if eventually there will be more and more electric cars, so they will need these, and we will need to put them in, otherwise we won't get the customers.
Gentlemen, there appears to be no further questions, so you're free to go. Convener, there's no further deputations, so I'll hand back to yourself.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Can I ask if the members have any questions for officers? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Convener. Just to start off in relation to the Ghost Island and crossing the road to the path, and we've already been informed, but just confirmation that this is right, that the path will be 2 metres wide until it connects up to the existing path. Was any consideration on crossing the road given to putting an island in place? It's a straight road, it's a fast road, yet good visibility, and that's why it's straight. And I just want to sort of see an island crossing at some part there would have helped with pedestrians crossing the road, and just ask if that was considered and if there was a reason not to do it.
Lachlan, can I bring you in here?
Yeah, that's no problem. In terms of your question regarding an island, that's something that I hadn't considered at this time. But I mean, if you do have concerns over that, we do have the condition regarding the finalised design for this, the layout there. So that's something that could be incorporated into that.
How would we as elected members have input into that? Or would that just become an officer's decision? Thank you.
It would probably be an officer's decision. I mean, we can go to the road safety team and get comments from them on that matter.
Thank you.
Bailey Williamson.
Thank you, Convener. My question is about the objectives raised an issue about a travel plan or green travel plan. I was just wondering if officers would like to comment on that.
I'll take that one, Bailey Williamson. Yes, so green travel is obviously quite high on the council agenda, and we want to encourage it wherever possible. So we did carefully consider whether a green travel plan was considered necessary here. However, in this instance, because they are providing the infrastructure, so because there are bus stops proposed at the north and south side of the A977, in addition to a footpath link to the village, in addition to electric charging vehicle points, in addition to cycle parking, we didn't feel it was necessary to include a green travel plan because they are proposing the infrastructure that will encourage green travel itself.
Thank you. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. It's just really for clarity. There's been conversation about the developer contributing towards a community bus service. This type of application does not, am I correct in saying we do not have any this type of application, and because it's not residential, we don't have developers' contributions for specifics?
It would be subject to the transport infrastructure developer contributions. However, this zone doesn't, where the site is, does not fall within one of those designated zones. So we don't need to request a transport contribution in this instance.
Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Kavita. Coming back to this question of the ghost island, report paragraph 85 talks about a trip generation of 362 vehicles. So potentially we could have vehicles which to turn right into the site at the ghost island and come back. We could have vehicles once they exit the site wishes to turn right. So we could be formulating some sort of cure traffic in both places. I was just wondering, is that the ideal solution, or perhaps some sort of roundabout be a better way in and out to allow traffic in and out much easier?
Mr. McLean.
Yep, thank you for your question. In terms of a ghost island or roundabout, I got in touch with the road safety team and their recommendation was a ghost island. In terms of the traffic volumes, yes, there was going to be between 7 and 10 o'clock at night, there was going to be 362 vehicles arriving and departing the site. But when we look at it at the peak hours in terms of 8 to 9, we're looking at 2 vehicles coming in and 7 vehicles coming out. So we've got a total of 9 vehicles at that time. And then between in the PM peak hour, between 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock, we're looking at 23 vehicles coming in and 11 vehicles coming out, giving a total of 34. So whilst you may have concerns about queuing, I think with the volume of cars that are expected to come in and out, I think the ghost island should be able to accommodate that appropriately.
Thank you. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. Just again in relation to the SSSI area and the condition that's put in there, which says, put the developer is to put a hedge up. Having asked the developer this, where they're obviously looking at more a nature-based wildlife beneficial hedge, which adds biodiversity itself. When I read the condition, I very much read like it's a trimmed hedge. It is just saying it hedge enough, or is there some wording that can go in there just to sort of stipulate that putting a hedge up should benefit biodiversity as well within, so that's your addition. So it's not just protecting the SSSI area, but you're adding an enhanced biodiversity around it as well, while you're creating a hedge to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're looking at the conditions in the round as well, and in relation to condition 25, there's a requirement that all the advice contained within the ecology report is implemented and included in that, and we will look at that in conjunction with any proposals for planting, which would need to specify and be approved.
And that specific hedge was mentioned within that report to ensure it is.
Well, all proposals were required to be considered in relation to the recommendations on how to make the site as biodiverse as possible, and that will be taken into account when we're considering the landscaping scheme.
I can just, sorry, convener, I can just give a supplementary there, because I know you raised concerns when you questioned the applicant on the triple SI. Condition 27 requires an independent ecological clerks of works to visit the site at least once a week, and they would be independent from the council, independent from the applicant, and one of their duties would be to monitor the impact on that triple SI. So if at any point this hedge wasn't forthcoming or there was bad practices in place, they would report that back to the council and we could intervene from an enforcement perspective. So hopefully that gives you some reassurance that if there is any failure to comply with the hedge, it would be picked up on these weekly visits.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I'm really principally concerned about the active travel. In principle, we have a 202 bus service that's not working at the moment. Is predicated on the council subsidising it. That subsidy could disappear. In terms of the path network, walking next to A977 isn't a pleasant experience, and personally I wouldn't want to do it. In terms of cycling, I wouldn't want to cycle next to the A977. So I think as a consequence of all this, I've heard that there's this sort of semi-commitment to putting in a minibus service, but in principle, I think this is going to create a lot of additional vehicle car journeys in particular. So I'm just wondering how officers think that MPF policy 13 fits in here, because it says that applications won't be supported in locations which would increase reliance on the private car. So how do you feel it fits within policy 13?
Thanks, Councillor Cuthbert. So I think a key consideration to remember here is the site is brownfield in nature, and MPF 4 supports the development of brownfield sites where there are sustainable links. Now here we have to look at what's reasonable for us to ask for. And in this instance, we consider that the upgrade of the bus stops, the path, the cycle and the EV charging is enough for this brownfield site. We have to also consider what's in the applicant's control, and they've already demonstrated today that they have approached neighbouring landowners who haven't been willing to support this. So as a council, we need to look at what are the sustainable links within our gift, and we consider that the path, the bus stops and the cycle parking is sufficient enough in this instance.
Go ahead, yeah.
Thank you. And in terms of the safety of the site, we've heard mention of the depth of the pools. They're 18 meters deep, which is deep, and therefore going to be cold. Can we stipulate that the fencing that should go around them? Because I don't see anything in the plans at the moment. Can that be conditioned?
Like that's a matter that would require to be considered by the operator of the park to ensure that they comply with health and safety legislation, and whether or not they feel that there's any necessity for any physical measures or whether signage or other notification to the users of the facility would be sufficient. But it's covered by separate legislation that shouldn't be overlapped by the planning regime, so we wouldn't recommend that a condition should be applied in relation to health and safety matters covered by health and safety legislation.
I'd also just point out as well that it's not uncommon in Perth and Kinross for lodges to be next to lock-ins such as this. We do have a number of holiday parks that are similar like this. One within your ward that springs to mind, Loch Leven Lodges on the banks of Loch Leven.
If I can come back on that, this slope on the loch is very shallow. The slope on this quarry can be extremely steep, so it's not the same situation. Sorry.
No, I fully appreciate it's not the same situation. I was just using that as the first example that sprung to my head. My point was more that it's not uncommon for holiday parks to be on a lock-in such as this.
Thank you. Before we go on, Councillor Illingworth, I noticed that you left the room. Okay, thank you. Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Convener. This is to do with the drainage question. I noticed that we've got two SUDS features on the site, and I just wondered, will they have to be maintained, and if so, who's going to do it? And the other point to follow through on is something one of the objectors brought up on was that I mentioned that the private sewerage system that's going to go in place may be overwhelmed by the number of lodges that are here. So are we happy that that's satisfactory as well?
Yes, Councillor Braun. Firstly, I'd refer you to paragraph 95 of the report. So our flooding team and SEPA have both looked at this from a drainage and flooding perspective, and actually our qualified flooding consultants have established that actually the rate of discharge post-development will be better than what it is pre-development into this outfall. So it will actually result in betterment to that outfall, and that's because we have the SUDs on the site. So any water that is on the site just now is not controlled at all, generally going to that outfall, but there will be controls in place post-development. So our flooding and drainage consultants are actually considering this to be a betterment upon the completion of development. Hopefully that answers your question.
Just a quick supplementary, if I may. The SUDs themselves, will they have to be, are they not the expert infiltration ones, or will the silt get built up and do they have to be cleaned out? I mean, are they self-maintaining, I suppose what I'm saying, or does somebody have to actually maintain them?
I think the responsibility for ensuring that the SUD system is maintained appropriately such that it operates to its full efficiency would be for the operator of the park to undertake. And if there was any non-compliance, obviously we've got condition 31 that sets out the standard that would require to be achieved, but thereafter maintenance would lie with the owner as it would for any property.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that further, condition 31 requires them to submit the full detailing of this, and the tail piece on there requires that agreed scheme to be implemented. So if at any point we felt they weren't managing it appropriately in line with what they'd submitted to us, we could intervene.
Thank you. Any further questions? No further questions. Therefore, I will put forward a motion for approval for this application. This application will redevelop a brownfield site, bringing in tourism and jobs which will contribute to the local economy. It also will clean up a site that has become a dumping ground. I believe that with the conditions in place, this will be a good development, and therefore I support permission for the application. Do you have a seconder? Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, convener. Those were just about my words exactly. So you beat me to it there. I'm quite happy to second and echo all your comments there. Thank you.
Now, I believe, before I ask for an amendment, I believe that Mr. Panton has some information to give to us.
Yeah, just to make members aware, upon publishing the report, our legal team reviewed it and they suggested some minor alterations to conditions just to tighten them up and make them more enforceable. It doesn't alter the content of the conditions in any way. We're not changing the conditions as such. We are just making them more robust. So, convener, if you're happy to include that into your motion, we can action that accordingly.
I am. Bailey McLaren.
I am.
Councillor Waters, you have a point of clarity.
Yeah, just going back to one of my questions to Lachlan and the idea with islands. I know with subsequent questions it was looking at the road stuff. You know, the idea of the island that I was questioning is very much over the pedestrian active travel site with people coming from the site into Pall Mill to hopefully benefit the local economy there as well. And it was just to, you know, is there a way within either an amendment or part of the motion we can express a will as a committee, or even just me as an individual if that's the case, that we seriously look at the crossing of that road for pedestrians to connect up to the active travel route which connects into Pall Mill.
What we could do, subject to the convener's agreement with his motion and Bailey McLaren's second, on condition 6 we've got points A to F. We could add a point G to include a crossing island there, and the convener, if he's agreeable, could incorporate that into his motion.
Crossing island or similar, something that improves the safety for crossing the carriageway.
Yeah, like I say, we could put G in just to put a pedestrian crossing island there.
Can I ask the convener if he would be willing to include that, and Billy McLaren if they would be willing to include that within the motion?
Yes, I am.
Yes, I am too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask, is there an amendment? No amendment. Therefore, permission is granted subject to the conditions and the revised conditions contained in the report or handling. Thank you. We will now have a 10-minute break. So can we move on to the next item, please? Yes, is everybody online?
Members online, can I check your back, please? Councillor Harvey,
I'm here.
Councillor James,
Hi, Jess.
Councillor Leishman,
Hello, Jeff.
and Councillor Reid.
Yes, made it this time.
Thank you. All other members are in the Chambers, convener.
Thank you. Right, move on to the next item, which is for the erection of a 400 megawatt battery storage system and associated infrastructure at Meagle Blair Gowrie. To introduce the report, well, introduce the report? No, speak to the report. Is Mr. Panton.
Thank you, convener. We now move on to an application which is currently under consideration from the Scottish Government's Energy Consent Unit, otherwise known as the ECU. Members are advised that we are not the determining authority for this application, and Perth and Kinross Council are only a consultee. Today we are seeking agreement that PKC responds to the ECU with no objection to the application. Members should also note that if we respond with an objection to the ECU, then this will trigger the requirement for a public inquiry to be held. Please note that the ECU advised Perth and Kinross Council this week that the capacity of the plant will change from 450 megawatt, as indicated in the papers, to 900 megawatts. However, there is no change at all to any of the physical infrastructure or the plans that are before you, just simply that it's changing from 450 megawatt output to 900 megawatts. I will now take the committee through a short presentation to detail the proposal further. So here we see the location of the site. The site is approximately 2 kilometres north of Meagle and 4 kilometres southeast of Alyth. The site is to the immediate south of a newly created substation facility. The substation is a key component of the Keith to Kincardine 400 kilovolts East Coast Reinforcement Project, which is identified as a national development within the National Planning Framework 4. Next slide, please. We now have a proposed site plan. The facility will comprise of 354 battery storage units, 236 inverters, 118 transformers, and a switchgear unit and substation building. Next slide, please. This plan shows the elevation of the proposed substation. This is relatively consistent to similar infrastructure at the newly created neighbouring facility. Next slide, please. We now have a typical elevation plan of one of the battery units. Members should note that the units housing the batteries are secure and designed to protect contents from the elements. Each of the units are also fitted with fire-resistant insulation, as well as fans acting as automatic cooling systems. Next slide, please. The site will be secured by 3-metre high security fencing. This plan shows a typical elevation of the fencing proposed. I will now take members through a series of photographs to show the site in more context. This first photograph shows the access to the existing substation facility. This has recently been upgraded to accommodate the new facility. Next image, please. This photograph now shows the entrance to the existing substation facility. You can also see the pylon infrastructure in the background. Next image, please. We now have an artist's impression showing the facility in year 0 upon implementation. You can see the proposed storage containers clearly here. Next impression, please. This artist's impression was taken from the same viewpoint as the last image, but now shows the facility upon the planting being established by year 10. As seen, the impact has now been considerably minimised. Next slide, please. Thank you, Convener. That now concludes my presentation. I will leave members with the proposed site plan for reference.
Thank you, Mr. Parton. We do have deputations on this item, so I'll hand over to the Vice Convener for the deputation procedures. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Can I call on Councillor Colin Stewart? Councillor Stewart is an elected member in the Strathmore Ward and recently asked to talk at this committee, and under section 19.9 of standing orders, our convener granted this request for Councillor Stewart to address the paper. Councillor Stewart, you've got 10 minutes in your own time.
Thank you very much, Convener, Vice Convener and members. I will be very brief. My concern relates to flooding impact from this development. For the last couple of years, as a local elected member for the area, I've participated in meetings of the Community Liaison Group for the SSEN substation immediately adjacent to the northwest. That work has now completed, although they will be returning in future for further upgrades. But at the last meeting, local residents, which was at the tail end of last year, so after the October flooding, the local residents and landowners present at the Community Liaison Group meeting pointed out that the ground for the proposed new battery energy storage system had been underwater in October. My concern is that once you put battery storage units on the site that was previously underwater, and they are protected from the elements, the water runoff from that will severely impact the critical infrastructure of the National Grid and SSEN's network on the adjacent site to the northwest. I would draw members' attention to paragraph 60 of the report, wherein the only consideration that's been given to drainage and flooding assessment is about protecting the site itself by raising the battery storage units to 40.5 metres AOD based on the maximum fluvial flood level of 39.9 plus a 0.6 metre freeboard. There's no reference to the consequential impact on the adjacent site. I would also therefore draw members' attention to policy 52 of the local development plan, where in the second paragraph it says that there will be a general presumption against proposals for built development where the proposal would increase the probability of flooding elsewhere. That is also reflected in National Planning Framework 4, in policy 22. In the preamble under local development plans, at the second paragraph, second sentence says a precautionary approach should be taken regarding the calculated probability of flooding as a best estimate, not a precise forecast. And then in policy 22 C1, development proposals will not increase the risk of surface water flooding to others or itself be at risk. And C3, seek to minimise the area of impermeable surface. The tops of these battery storage units would be the impermeable surface that my concern is would lead to flooding on the adjacent critical infrastructure. I would also remind members that although it's not at the recent meeting, most recent meeting of the Environment, Infrastructure and Economic Development Committee, the Council responded as a policy position to the Scottish Government's consultation on water, wastewater and surface water to say that we wanted to take account of local knowledge when considering the risk of flooding in areas, and that we also wanted to ask SEPA to update both the frequency and areas most at risk in their flood risk maps. There is reference, I think, in the application, if not in the paper, Oh no, it's in the paper as well. It's a 1 in 200 year plus climate change event flood envelope. 1 in 200 years is something which happened in October, probably 3 times in the space of a month. It refers to a 0.5% chance, and flooding experts used as consultants by the council and officers from within the flooding team at a recent meeting where we were considering flood risk in Alyth said that the 1 in 200 year event was not a useful way to describe the areas at risk of that extent of flooding, because the flooding was more prevalent and happening more frequently. That concludes my remarks. I would encourage the committee to submit an objection on the basis of the flood risk to adjacent areas as outlined in Policy 52 of the LDP and Policy 22 of NPF 4.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart, for your address. Would you be willing to take questions from members? Members, if you've got any questions, please populate the chat function. Councillor Braun.
Thank you for your presentation. The source of the water we're talking about on the flooding, is that water coming from a nearby river or a burn, or is it just pure the rain it collects on the ground? There's a technical name for these things, but I have no idea which one applies to it. But is it pluvial or fluvial? I don't know. But whatever it is it coming? Is it pure the rain it's collecting on the ground in the layout of the topography of the land, or is there a river overflowing from somewhere?
So I believe it would be a combination. So there is a river nearby with rainwater and surface water that will saturate the ground if we have any repeat events. And I would remind members that back at the start of 2016, January, the Vale of Strathmore was more like a loch that you could navigate from one side to the other by kayak. But even so, the issue would be then that you're taking away the ability for the ground to saturate by putting impermeable surfaces above it, and then the risk to the adjacent site will come from surface water runoff from the battery storage compound.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Thank you, Colin, for your deputation. Colin, I'm just trying to get some clarity in my head on something that you put in your deputation. Did you mention that it was underwater in October? And I think we're all aware that we had some extreme water events in October. What's it like just now?
I haven't been out to the site, but like I say, this isn't a 1 in 200 year event. There was October, there was certainly January 2016, there was probably August 2020 as well during the mid-pandemic flooding. Certainly at another site close by in Cooper Angus, there was surface water and saturation water, which caused the flooding of the substation at Cooper Angus, such that covers were coming off items on the ground and floating around within the SSEN substation compound. What I don't want to see is that happening again here at a really critical point on that East Coast overhead line.
Sorry, Colin, I wasn't trying to be pedantic at all. We had the inordinate amount of water in October, and we've had inordinate amounts of rain since then. That was the reason for asking what it's like now. It wasn't to try and trip you up in any way whatsoever. I'm trying to understand, is it still a floodplain? Is it naturally clear now?
As I say, I haven't been out to the site recently. I imagine that it's absolutely clear now, but I think the issue is in terms of what that NPF 4 says about taking a precautionary approach regarding the calculated probability of flooding as a best estimate and not a precise forecast. We all know what happened in October. There have been other events. There will be more, and they will come at a more than a 1 in 200 year frequency. So it's about taking the precautionary approach and protecting the site rather than it being continually waterlogged or at risk 365 days a year.
Councillor Stewart, there appears to be no further questions. You're free to go. Can I call on Miss Ellis of AE Associates, agent for the application? Miss Ellis, you have 10 minutes for your deputation. I'll give you a prompt after 9. Okay.
Good afternoon. Firstly, thank you for allowing me for a few moments to discuss the battery energy storage system proposed. I won't take up a lot of your time. It was merely to reiterate the benefits of the development, and as it's been highlighted for the flood risk, I will also detail that for you as well. The development will, as a minimum, store and supply 657 million kilowatt hours of electricity per year. And as an enabling technology for renewable energy, it equates to 185,977 metric tonnes of CO2 saved annually. The site is sensibly sited with a design inlay that positively integrates with its local landscape context. It's not visibly intrusive, and through the space of time and the inset of screening, which will increase the biodiversity in the area, will be well. It's not visually intrusive and protects the visual amenity of any residents and users of roads, core paths and any other important recreational routes. There's no overriding impediments to the development on the grounds of ecological impacts and of flooding, of noise impact or any other element. With regards to the potential of the flood risk, the units have been designed to be elevated above the floodplain, and there is also a site-specific SUDS design that will ensure that there's no increase to anywhere at all for the flood risk. This was designed with the substation in situ and taken into account their existing systems. At no point will there be an increase to flooding or surface water. There's no, the detailed reporting on noise impact, cultural and historical impact and construction, traffic management and access has shown that there will be no levels of impact, unacceptable levels of impact from the development. I'm merely here to reiterate the benefits of the development and answer any questions or queries that you may have.
Thank you, Ms Ellis. Can I request members to populate the chat box if you have any questions? Bailey McCann.
Thank you. It's not maybe just a direct question. In our papers here, it's saying the Keith to Kincardine East Coast Reinforcement Project. Could you maybe just expand and explain what that is?
That project is been the SSEM project. The substation with the pylons carries the line that transmits the power up and down the lines, and so this is a substation that will be connected. This is the battery station that will be connected to that substation. So it will take power as and when required from the substation if there's too much, store it and then put it back on as and when it's required.
So will this power be going back into the grid then for our use?
Yes.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Yeah, I didn't quite understand your comment about the flooding risk. We heard earlier from Councillor Stewart saying that there was a flooding area in the area and it's an issue. I think you said that there wouldn't be an increase in the flooding risk, given that you're putting these units on site. My understanding is that the ground is currently permeable, but these units are impermeable. So I don't quite understand how it wouldn't lead to an increased risk.
The bases that would be put on is a specifically designed base that the units will stand on, and that's a surface that allows the water to drain naturally through. So it's the drainage design of the surface that the units will stand on.
Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Completely different subject from flooding. What is the fire risk of these batteries? We're talking about 657 million kilowatts. That's a lot of energy going through them. And what is the fire risk of these things? Presumably it's lithium batteries, which we know can catch fire and do explode occasionally. So that's my first question. Thank you.
There has been a fire risk assessment and there are fire safety precautions in every unit. They're also monitored remotely so that if there's any increase in heat or anything untoward that, raises alarms, then they are immediately shut off.
Ms. Ellis, there appears to be no further questions. You're free to go. Thank you for your time. Convener, there's no further deputations, so I'll hand back to yourself.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Can I ask the committee if they have any questions for officers? Councillor Braun.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. This is a bit of a technical question, really, because the circumstances of this paper. When we normally put a case possibly to refuse, hypothetically, we put through the policy, and then Mr. Elliott asked us to justify the reason for that refusal. In this instance, is that still the case? Because the impression I got from Mr. Pandon was if we're unhappy with it, it then goes to public inquiry. So if we come up with a policy, would we still have to offer a justification as a normal refusal would be?
Yes, Councillor Braun, this is a consultation. If you decide that you wish to respond by saying you object to it, that will then spark a public inquiry. So it's not quite like an ordinary application. It will automatically spark a public inquiry. So yes, right now you would have to say why you would want to object. And just bear in mind later on that it wouldn't be written submissions appeal as we're commonly used to. You would be automatically into a public inquiry where you would be expected to justify why you were objecting to it. Yeah, but it is, yeah, it's similar, but not quite the same as an application.
Thank you for that. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. Just in relation to the flooding issues, is it right that the application won't displace any existing flooding? So this area underneath the units will accommodate any existing flooding that's happening. Thank you.
I'll get that one, Councillor Waters. Yes, so as per the papers, initially our flooding team looked at this proposal and were concerned with what were proposed and required further mitigation and clarification on matters. That was subsequently submitted to the flood team, and that addressed all of the concerns, like what Councillor Stewart raised in his deputation. Our flooding team were happy with all of the mitigation proposed, that there will be no flood risk. So going back to what Mr. Elliott said, if we were to move an objection today on the grounds of flood risk, I think it would be very difficult for councillors to defend at a public inquiry, considering there is a response from our flooding team who have no objection.
Yeah, maybe just providing some further clarity, because I appreciate that the documents are on the Energy Consent Unit website, not the Perth and Kinross Council one, so people might not have as easily accessed them, but there's documentation there that covers flood risk in quite significant detail. I'm looking at a document here that also recognises that it's acknowledged that development out with the flood area is preferred, but there are site-specific circumstances here. As you know, it's immediately adjacent to a very large substation, and that's the optimum location, that there's mitigation available. That's also been accepted by SEPA, who are the statutory consultee, and that will allow the continuance of the essential infrastructure to be constructed within a flood risk area. But in specific, the units are mounted on platforms, and there's an image within the document that shows that. They're raised above ground level, so there's passage to the freeboard level beneath it, and there's free draining ground beneath, and measures put in place, and it's been calculated through accepted measures that the floodwaters would have no effect on the operation of the devices in themselves, nor would they in turn adversely affect drainage of the site from the situation at the minute. In fact, the mitigation is likely to improve drainage situations. And equally, because although the power cables in themselves are located within the ground, that is routine, and it's routine for them to be below water tables as well, to enable them to be cooled naturally, and they're not affected by water. But it's quite clear in this document that every effort's been made to locate those away from the southern burn, as an example, but to retain them within the development site boundary. And as I say, there is an image that shows a typical detail, and in the view of SEPA, that's perfectly acceptable. That's also been accepted by our own flood engineers. So if that gives some clarity, appreciating that members and others might not have seen that document if they've been looking on the Perth and Kinross Council website. Thank you.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is the appropriate place to ask this, but there's two aspects to this I'm curious about. First of all, this is the first energy consents unit application I think we've considered. So does one move for object or accept? And the second question is, when I was looking at the documentation, I was trying to find the reference online, the 230005, and it didn't bring anything up. So I'm just asking whether it's possible to make it so that when you put that reference in with the console as the bit on the end, we can actually get a link to the website on the ECU, because I was a bit confused by that to begin with. But two parts to the question.
Councillor Cuthbert, yes. You'll see what the paper is doing is it's recommending the council does not object to the proposal and also recommends conditions. So if you agree with that, that would then go through and that will be narrated back to the energy consent unit. If you don't agree with that and you're wanting to object, then you would have to narrate reasons as to why you'd be looking at your policy, why that policy is breached, and what evidence you have to support that, bearing in mind what Mr. Patton said about assessment by SEPA and flooding team already. And then, of course, that would then be narrated back to the ECU, and it would automatically trigger a public inquiry where the members that put that forward would be expected to be present and support their reasons for objection. Second part.
Yeah, maybe covering a second. So if you see the papers, we've got a link to the Energy Consents Unit website that has all the information on it. That's what we are referring to as officers. So we've just received a letter that says we are consulting you. We then reference the Energy Consent Unit website in the same way as an applicant or an interested party would do to the Perth and Kinross Council website if we were the determining authority, but we don't physically have all the information within the Perth and Kinross website, and there's a link to the relevant website in the papers that we've had here. We could investigate whether or not we can make the consul reference bring up a link that then takes you to the Energy Consents Unit. But again, just remembering that we are simply a consultee of a proposal that's been submitted to the Scottish Government's Energy Consent Unit rather than to ourselves.
I accept that. I think that the issue was I was working off a paper copy, and when you feed in the reference that's on the paper copy, it doesn't bring anything up. And that's really what I'm saying, is that if we can investigate that, so we've got a unique reference number that takes you straight to the ECU, that would help, I think.
Yeah, and I think the reference number that's in the papers is the unique reference number for the Energy Consent Unit application. Unless I'm misunderstanding, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the reference number is ECU blah, 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 but it doesn't say how to find the ECU bit, if you see what I mean. So it's actually putting in the full, so people can actually navigate to it.
Yeah, so we could probably do a separate paragraph in the paper that says, should you wish to access, go to www. And enter this reference. We can certainly look at that, but you're quite right. This is the first time we've had one of these papers before the council under the current procedures. So we will look at that. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I think it would be a great idea to put it on the link that we go on to so that we can link to the ECU. We have a question from Councillor James.
Yeah, thanks, convener. And I'll back up everything that's just been said from Councillor Cuthbert. I too could the link for our planning works okay, but for the ECU, I didn't know where to start looking, to be honest. So totally get that. My question for Christian really is, it would be very difficult for us to refuse or object to this. However, are we allowed to put conditions in the fact that, you know, local knowledge, as Councillor Stewart brought up in his deputation, we're so often we dismiss local knowledge, and I'm very aware of all the flooding issues in that area, definitely, and you know the Isla last year or so has broken its banks so many times, and that's just to the south of this site. So are we able to put in a comment that that's to be further investigated, perhaps, please?
Thanks, Councillor James. Yes, so if we today, for argument's sake, were to agree this paper and say no objection, we send this paper to the ECU and that has our contained recommended conditions. So if you felt an additional condition was necessary, you could incorporate or move a motion to incorporate that, should I say, and that could be considered by the ECU. But like I say, we are only a consultee. The ECU might disregard it, but if you felt it was necessary to include an additional condition, that could be done as part of our response. So we could respond and say, no objection, here's our recommended conditions as per the paper, plus an additional one. Yes, so sorry, I was just hearing from Colin Elliott there from legal. We can also change the content of the report if necessary to include a comment. However, like I said earlier in my previous answer to Councillor Waters, because we have got the response from flooding that says they're happy with the mitigation proposed, it could be a conflicting response if we say flooding are happy, but we'd like to place a comment that you should investigate flooding. For reassurance, the ECU will assess flooding anyway, regardless of what our response is. They are the determining authority. They will look at flood risk, and we will be part of that process, but we are not the determining authority.
Can I come
Thank
back,
you.
please, convener?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Sean. I totally get what you're saying. My concern, I suppose, in this respect, is that the development of the whole site, if you like, this battery storage is being placed closer to the Isla, which, as we've discovered, you know, several times over the last year, 2 years, it has broken its bank, and I know a lot of our flooding is done at desktop based. And my concern is that we're actually missing hard evidence. That's all, Sean. I do take your point, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. And I do appreciate where you're coming from. However, the difficulty lies in how you defend that position at a public inquiry. But I'd leave that up to you to make your decision on how you want to vote.
Thank you, Councillor Braun.
Thanks, convener. Just a quick follow-up on Councillor Stewart's comments about the flooding again, and the effect it might have on the existing substation. I'm just wondering, are we happy with our assessment that our mitigation or suggestion of mitigation is sufficient to ensure there's no risk to the substation, or it's minimalised to the point that we're happy with?
Yes, we're happy. Like I said earlier, initially our flooding team had concerns and looked for additional clarification and mitigation. Upon receiving that, they're more than satisfied there'll be no impact upon the neighbouring facility.
Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, convener. Just to go back to this little flooding question, we point of detail, and apologies if it is there and I'm not picked it up. Our flood team have responded. Was that pre or post these events that happened in October, because that maybe would, as you're saying, cause, if we were to substantiate something at a consultation, that to me is a point where it would give us reason to have concern.
Yes, so their initial comments were before the flooding events, and thereafter they have not amended their comments post-October and are aware this is a live application. So if they had a differing position, they could have notified us of a new position, but they've not notified us. So we're on the assumption that they've taken the events of October into consideration.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? No further questions? Can we therefore agree the paper in line with the officer's recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, right, no problem. Councillor Cuthbert, you put in a motion. All right, okay. Totally confusing me here. Right, so can I have a seconder for my motion?
Second.
Thank you. Councillor Cuthbert, you have an amendment.
Yeah, partly because this is the first one we've done, but in principle, I would like to move an amendment that we add in a comment to say that local sources indicate that flooding is prevalent in this area, and we would recommend talking to the local population prior to reaching a decision. Something along those lines. I'm sure Colin will help clarify.
Do you want that to be added to the motion?
Yes, in essence, I would like to see that comment, or that comment being added to the comments that we're putting. So we're not objecting,
yeah,
but we can change the comments. What I'm asking for is an additional comment to say that local information indicates that there is flooding in this area, and it bears investigation. Convener, I'm being suggested that we should look at specific dates in that amendment. So it's the extreme weather events that have happened recently and actually give specific dates.
There is one possibility, Councillor Cuthbert, is before we go into asking whether you have a seconder for that, is whether Councillors Massey and Williamson are willing to adopt that into their own motion. Then you wouldn't have an amendment. And what I've written down here is simply passing on a comment that local sources indicate that flooding is prevalent, and suggesting that there should be contact with the local community, local consultation to explore that further. Yes. Because of course we're just consultees, we can't tell them to do. Yeah, but what I'm looking to, if that's, I know that seems to be what you're looking for, Councillor Cuthbert, and if need be, we can ask for a seconder. But I'm asking Councillors Massey and Williamson whether you're willing to adopt that into your motion.
Yes, I'm happy to adopt that into the motion.
Bailey Williamson, yes. So therefore, we have a motion to approve the paper with the additional comment. So I think we're now looking to see whether there's any amendment to that.
So now we'll ask for an amendment. No amendment. Okay, the paper goes forward with the recommendations of the officers with the added comment. Thank you. We will now have a lunch break of 1 hour. So if everybody's back here by 25, well, make it 1:30, 1:30.
Convener, could I ask a favour? I did mention to you I've got a meeting to go to. Can we make it 1:40?
We'll make it 1:40.
An extra 5 minutes if you could, please. Thank you very
Okay.
much. That's very kind. Thank you.
Thank you.